We're in Thailand with Global Blockchain Show, and today I'm with Annie from Dragonfly. Annie, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Mia, for having me. Super excited to be here.
It's always good to have a chat with you. It's always fun. We just recently talked in New York. I guess like the last two previous times we're in New York. So it's good to meet in a new city. How are you finding Thailand?
I mean, I think like just the diversity of people is pretty nuts. Like I learned, I think this past week that like Thailand of the Southeast Asian countries has actually had like probably some of the least foreign investment, which I find kind of surprising given just like I think the vivacity of people is like pretty crazy, right? You see people like all the way from manufacturing to like software and agri-tech, and Thailand has like a very, I think, booming medical tourism business. So it's like all these areas that I think crypto can play a part, right?
Do you like looking at the Asian region more than the US for projects?
It's interesting. Like, you know, we invest everywhere, but I think like if you look at just hours spent or anything like that, it's like the kind of dominance and dominion, I think, of like the American ecosystem and startups is still just like overpowering. We hope to change that. I think the more work we do around like staples and I think like Web3 adoption kind of in fintech or even deep in stuff, I think like that's super exciting here because that's like what people are good at in Asia, right? I mean, it's like the manufacturing powerhouse of the world. It could be China, Vietnam, who knows, maybe Thailand.
Mm-hmm. Last time we talked, it was pre-elections. Now we're post-elections. How do you see it, impacting the industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the part that nobody can argue with is that like we probably just have too many regulations in the West, and like you see this kind of constrict the economy in terms of housing and healthcare and education, right? Like, I think one big problem for us in crypto is that like how do we educate people what the opportunity is here, right? Like even when you talk to normal people in Thailand, it's like they see crypto as a speculation tool or maybe a status thing or like whatever, but we're trying to make it like the substrate of the economy, right? And I think where we're going with like hopefully fewer and smarter regulations, it's like probably good, right? Because I think anyone who's been a founder realizes just like the massive amount of red tape. And Nick Carter, which I know you've spoken to him, like the whole operation Chokepoint 2.0 stuff is like quite crazy, right? Like the sort of subterfuge that's going on. And then today we had the Polymarket stuff, right, with the FBI raiding Shane's house. Like all of these, I just don't think paint a great sign. And there's that line in investing, right, where I think 3 dots don't always make a line, but then sometimes when it kind of looks that way, you're like, how do we kind of right the ship?
Polymarket was like significant during the elections. It was really exciting to see. How did you feel about it?
I mean, fantastic, right? It's like kind of what we're here to do where you, like I've known Shane for a few years now, but to have that sort of hero's journey, right, of just being sort of a wayward kind of young founder, no one really understands what's going on, to having your product being used and watched by potentially billions. I mean, that's like the most exciting thing I think there is, right? It makes all of this kind of worth it, right? Because if you talk to like VCs and founders in the early days of the internet, they had sort of had the same phenomenon of like, is our work really valuable, right? Like, what is sort of the point of the internet? And just like that, just like we have now, it's like people had this sort of cypherpunk view of the internet, right? In the early 90s, you had Nick Land talking about like all this crazy AI stuff that like has only come true now. And I think like we're sort of in that like early 90s, maybe mid 90s phase of like seeing crypto actually take over.
The year's coming to an end. What do you think has been some of the learnings for this industry?
Wow, where to begin? I think now what's interesting though is like we're finally probably seeing infra fatigue, right? And I think people have spoken about this for so long, but like I think it was the key, from Cosmos a few years ago, who kind of mentioned to me that like, he sort of sees now in the distance that we're kind of solving a lot of the foundational problems of crypto, right? Like in the EVM case, you have like Monad and Mega ETH kind of dominating both respectively in like software and hardware. And a few years ago, if you had asked me, it's like, no, we still actually had like real kind of foundational infra problems to have. And I'm not saying that's all done, but now whether it's you talk to exchanges, you talk to projects, there's just so much more of interest and demand in like making apps that people want to use, right? And we've like finally, I think, broken the floodgates on like make stuff people want.
Yeah, right? Well, hopefully.
What a crazy idea, right? It's like, how about we make stuff that like billions of people can use and change their lives, right? And I'm not saying infra is not important. Like I think there are many reasons why we've had to build this infra, but now we're kind of, I think, doing what we were meant to do here, which is like making the apps that people will like kind of govern and underscore their daily lives.
Do you feel like all the building blocks are in place for people to just come in and build better apps? And
Yeah, there's a few areas that I think, we should improve on. Like I think a lot of the RAS stuff, right, I think has been great, where like there is just, for whatever reason, I mean, there's just all this demand to like launch new chains, right? And I think like if you have companies like Caldera kind of making that super easy, it's like, I think around the DevOps stack, new ways of monetization, you can think of things like Spindle, right? I think doing things around like on-chain ads. Like I think all of these are important to like help projects figure out new ways to make money in crypto. And, there's this joke that like, the token is a product, right? But obviously we know that's like farcical because you can't keep that grift going for a very long time. So we need to figure out new ways to make money in sustainable ways, right? And I think that's the only way to get like Web2, TradFi, scientific people kind of interested in the space where it's like real business models and it's not just like token emissions.
Do you think focusing on security, I mean, we had a guest earlier talked about security and talked about the fact that if there is a sign that something is safe for like the end user that maybe is not tech savvy or crypto savvy, if there's the service to make it like super robust in terms of security, and then that sign, that mark on projects where they could say that they're built on it. I see this like being something crucial for the end user. Do you focus on security? Do you ever like go deep on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been a really strong point of interest for us. Like we've backed projects like Harpy and Blowfish in the past. But I think the future of security in crypto looks a lot more agentic. Like, and I think no one has really sort of figured out like what is a dynamic security model that works to the sort of chaotic factor of crypto, right? I think V1 security is very much like static. Someone tries to attack you, you sort of prevent it or you alert people. But I think there is maybe a model more that governs like proactive security, right? Like how can you sort of keep watch, monitor, and if there's an attack, maybe there's a counterattack, right? Because it's like crypto is the most adversarial environment on earth, right? And I think people forget that it's like you can make billions of dollars in a week, but at the same time, you can go to zero sort of instantly. And I think like the entire security model of crypto probably needs a pull fresh with the AI stuff, right? If you're in an adversarial environment and your opponent has just machine guns and you have a knife, right? I think like we have to sort of fix that because it's like billions of dollars at stake, right? I mean, luckily, I think this year we haven't seen too much of these like, I think attacks like we saw a few years ago, but to say that it's like solved, I think is not true.
We talked about DAI at the podcast at the panel the other day, and there were some hot takes. Not as hot as I expected, given like how I call it like dystopian, like AI entering crypto. It feels very like cyberpunk, and there's so much that could happen. I had two guests here earlier. They're building on DAI, and I asked both of them if something could go bad. And indeed, like they confirmed and painted the scene, and it's terrible. So hopefully there's a way that maybe the decentralization is able to put some brakes on AI. How do you see this overlap?
Yeah, I mean, I think like there are many questions in that. I think like we are still sort of figuring out like how digital abundance and digital scarcity will actually go together. Like I think one of the things I said at the panel was like we sort of had the last election where deepfakes didn't control everything, right? And like I think many people don't realize that the internet is mostly bots, crypto is mostly bots. You can sort of see that if you go to like the mempool and kind of like where the transactions are coming from and like who actually governs these things. So what does that world look like, right? When like you can't actually figure out what's real and what's fake. I mean, I think crypto is the only solution there, because if you're not verifying these things in a way that costs other people reputation and money, then we're just going to live in this like runaway growth of simulated content that you're sort of seeing. It's interesting that we're now talking about this in Asia, right? Because Asia was like so far ahead of these things. And I think like even then they haven't sort of figured out like what do you do in Japan or China, right? Where it's like everyone's glued to their phones. Things are just like sort of fake on TikTok or manufactured. And it is like basically propaganda. But I feel like in the West, there's actually, people are like talking about like, what are the ways that we can kind of prevent this manipulation, right? And you might call it fake news, you might call it whatever, regardless of what you may call it, it's like here and it's not going away, right? And we haven't figured out like, you can't like ban people off X and make the problem go away, right? You're going to find it on TikTok. You're going to find it somewhere else. Email, right? Like emails will just be phished at like 1,000 times better efficacy. So yeah, I think crypto is the way to solve the digital simulations. But how do you do that as a business? And how do you do that maybe as a protocol? And I think that's the part that's like the holy grail of this thing, right? Like, is it something like WorldCoin? Will it be a BitTensor subnet? Will it be like a whole new project? Whatever it is, I mean, it's just exciting to know that like we are at like the early stages of this, and then there's tons of opportunity there, I think, to make something that we all have to use, right? With many products in crypto, you don't actually know if like everyone will use it, right? I mean, you can think of like the average ZK FHE restaking thing, and it's like how many people will use that, right? And you have this like march of nines with like how many buzzwords people will put. But similarly, or maybe more inversely, it's like with this stuff, you know that you and I and everyone else in Thailand and America will have to use these things to kind of prevent themselves from this barrage of AI generated attack, I think, from all directions.
DeSci. Last year felt like it was the new hot thing. It feels like a little bit calmer this year. Have you been paying attention to it at all? Have you seen anything interesting?
Like DeSci.
DeSci.
Yeah. I think the past few years for the sector, I mean, I was actually talking about this yesterday as well with a few people in the space. Like, I think a lot of the DeSci projects, I think, are too revolved around investment. And I think the thing that works, you know, of course, it's like you have to rebuild the DAO model. I don't think the DAO model as it stands today is maybe necessarily the best model of innovation in the space. Maybe it's like a further iteration of the DAO model, right? But I think as it stands today is probably not the best way to like make the new oncology drug or like fund a new oncology drug. But that being said, I think like, you know, I'm glad that there's like tons of hype around it going in, right? You see CZ kind of backing bio protocol and stuff. But I want to see more around like, what are the unique ways that crypto economics can spur the development of these new drugs, I think. And like, what is actually the product that a lot of them want to sell? And like, it can't just simply be like easier investing and Ponzi-nomics around drugs, right? And I feel like maybe that's what it started with many years ago. I'm not saying that's how it is today, but I think we just need new products around like science and crypto.
Yeah, I see this being brought forward mainly around network states. So any project around network states and any conversations around it tend to attract, you know, longevity, DeSci, and all of that, which is great for society because, like all things health, I feel like there was less of a focus on it before. I feel like people nowadays are more focused on their diets, they're like measuring things.
I mean, there's a good reason for that, right? It's just that there'll be fewer people on Earth, maybe. So it's like if we have fewer people, maybe we should take better care of ourselves.
You say fewer because?
No, it's like we have I think like one of the problems that crypto tries to solve is just like the crushing debt burden we put on young people, right? And like you can see this even in Thailand, in the West. It's just like inflation has like destroyed many people's lives, right? I think it's like almost 60 countries in the world experiencing hyperinflation. That's not even to mention like all the other ones that are like basically there, but we just don't define it properly. So it's like you have the debt burden, we have fewer kids being made. And yeah, that's just like one of the big problems over time, right? Like what are the ways that we can have more kids and like, you know, protect society? I mean, Asia itself today in 50 years will not look like Asia, right?
I thought that birth rate being low previously, it was actually through conversations on the podcast I realized this. I used to think the low birth rate was bad for society, and like obviously we want to keep like a decent amount of people on Earth, and you know, like families growing and so on. I think that the main thing that is important for people to keep having kids, guests that have had a baby or have children, they have a more focused sense of responsibility towards the future, even when they leave. And guests that don't have that have a more of a sense of, you know, I'm only here for a while.
Like laissez-faire.
Yeah.
Right?
So think of this like sort of like recycling. If no one from your family or like your bloodline, whatever, is going to stay, why would you care? There's that sense. I picked that up like on the background. So I do see that being important. What do you think is going to happen in terms of like birth rate? Like obviously the government's going to start trying to do something. If we play that forward, is not crypto related.
Well, actually, no. I think it actually might be. So like, you know, if you look at like, I have a few friends working in this space, and many of them were doing this in Eastern Europe. And like, if you sort of look at like say how Hungary, I think, was on this like just straight down curve in terms of births, like everyone else, and they implemented fiscal policy for women. So I think like for example in Hungary, if a mother has more than 4 kids, she never pays income tax ever again. And like crypto is actually uniquely solved to solve these things because you have sort of like this programmable law baked in, right? So like for example, it's like obviously it's in code. So like if certain things happen, then you get paid. And maybe that's dystopian somewhat, but we're far beyond the Rubicon at this point. Like we don't actually have much time for South Korea and like Taiwan and like all in China, right? I mean, that's like probably one of the big stories of this year where like a lot of the people in the CCP and just general around the PBOC, like the central bank, have sort of realized like, yeah, the demographic numbers aren't looking too hot. How true that is, no one knows. But just the fact that like people have kind of come to those terms, right, and they need that to fix the economy is like we got to try everything. Like at this point, like we keep like pushing this thing, but like it's just like every day you wait, that's another 18 years you have to wait, right,
Yeah.
for future taxpayers. And I think that that's why there's all just like this such craze around AI because it's like we sort of need AI to work to like even have some semblance of capitalism in the future.
Well, some people would say that AI is going to make it worse because, like with the social media, the increase of suicide, it was very visible. And then with AI, like if people can talk with their phones instead of, or like whatever devices, instead of another human, that raises their sense of tolerance towards what's great, and probably lowers the chances of people, getting together. It is quite like, I don't know, like all of this coming together, like as it's playing out, it feels that there's a lack of attention to this because the reward is being placed on being productive and all these other things. I'm actually surprised, like the focus on health is perhaps like a raise of awareness, like you need to be healthy to perform, perhaps still around performance. But I feel like society has moved heavily towards being performant in life and then having the extra time to really enjoy life. But
yeah, that's a great point. That's actually, I think, where crypto has made a lot of innovation. I mean, I think two underrated models of crypto innovation centers around one, how we live, right? Like you can't imagine this like network state concept without crypto, which I find very interesting, right? If you remove the crypto from the network state stuff, it all just like crumbles down because I think it was Vitalik who said like, one of the big innovations from the crypto economy is just like this nomadic conference living, right? And you and I know all these people, right, who just kind of like bounce from conference to conference the whole year. And that's just like become commonplace. But imagine telling someone that 10 years ago, right? Like that's actually how you would live. They would all laugh you out of the room, right? Like that model of life didn't make sense. So I think that's one. But two, now it's like sort of culture as an economic good, I think is something where like if you innovate on culture before, it's like you had to make a movie, you had to make an art piece. But like as you and I also know, it's like many of the great artists kind of became great after they died, right? Doesn't really help a lot of people, I think. Da Vinci's one, right? And just sort of the list of, I think, the great artists are kind of like that. But separately now it's like you can just launch something. And if it's like Peanut or something like that, right? You just kind of rip to Mars and like people join whatever kind of mini cult is going on. And so before we used to have, I think, different discrete units of that. And it would be very, I think, like all over the place. There'd be a lot of dispersion. But now it's like people will just galvanize into a meme that will be culture and people just like succumb to that. And that's like a uniquely crypto invention, I think, where everyone is like bought in to these things and you have skin in the game. It is not just like a funny joke you tell your friend.
We always talk deep in, and I can't go without touching it because you're the man for that. Tell me what's exciting at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from the outset, right? It's like what will be the kind of things, companies, protocols that will like get 1 billion new net users, right? I think there's all these people. We now know that crypto is this not a distant force anymore. It's actually a force that like probably helped Trump in the election, right? And again, 4 years ago, I don't think that would have been the case, but now it like certainly is the case, right? Where the crypto super PACs are like some of the biggest and like they're donating all this money. So that being said, you don't really, I think if you're a founder building the future in the space, it's like sort of important to think like, how do I get new people onto my protocol or something, right? They have to be bought into me. Because like if they're already in the space, I think the rate of churn is just a lot higher, right? Like say they're an experienced developer, they can go from Solana to ETH to app to, right? Like the kind of developer mindshare you might have is not as strong as I think founders believe they are. So, okay, all of that being said, I would also say that, like, yeah, I mean, obviously, I think one of the big things we're excited about in DePIN is just like the growth of decentralized wireless, as an example. I think I was saying on the panel yesterday that like it still is mind blowing to me just how underrated people think Starlink is. And like, I think in 10 years, people look back on that as just like one of the big technological inventions, bigger than the iPhone, bigger than like, you know, maybe even oncology drugs or something like that, because it's like you had these people who could never use the internet and they were unproductive, and now they can actually be productive, right? And so I think that model of like how do you get more people on the internet is quite fascinating. I was actually talking to a great investor about this like a few weeks ago, and he said, I only want to invest in those things that say like an alien who came to Earth would be like, why hasn't anyone done this yet? Like, what are the blindingly obvious things like still left? And we always think, I think investors often think in terms of like style, right? I have to be smarter. I have to make like the great calculated like big short trade that no one else saw. But typically you don't, right? I mean, it's like you probably could have seen a lot of the NVIDIA growth curve in 2009. Did a lot of people? No, right? Because I think everyone is like trying to overthink things and be too smart. But investing is quite simple. It's like, what are the big secular trends that will be important in the future? And then how do you capture most of that value? And so I think we have a portfolio company, Dawn, I think that's doing a lot of great work there around sort of this model of like what could a lot of the potential Starlink technology look like for cities. And we all know, I think the future of the world is going to be urbanized, right? Like I don't think a lot of people want to live in the farmland. And so, yeah, how do we actually get all these people online? Once we get them online, they're all going to crypto.
Yeah, it's exciting. I know you have a hard stop. For everyone watching, where can they find you?
Yeah, they can DM me on Twitter, Ani_Pi. Find me on my blog, Electric Sheep, Dreams of Electric Sheep. But yeah, thanks, Mia. Appreciate it.
Ani, thank you.
Thanks.